All right, so I just wanted to do a quick reaction video. Um, a particular string of comments in the Derek Bros Daily News chat on Telegram was brought to my attention, and so I thought we'd do a little bit of an analysis here. Um, so it begins with the posting of an article, and I'm not going to read the article, or at least I might wait until I finish the exchange here that I'm going to read aloud and then read the article, depending on how much time it takes. Um, so Derek posted, good to see the expansion of agorist thought, especially among those recognizing that agorism does not equal anarcho-capitalism. And this is interesting because I recently had an argument with someone on Telegram against anarchism, and this person posted a link about anarcho capitalism and very much considers herself a fan of Derek Bros. So perhaps her mindset is not as consistent with his as she thought it might be. I'm just going to read the first sentence or so of this article. I have a saying that goes something like, I don't trust anybody who thinks taxation is theft, but profit isn't. So I find that to be a very interesting statement. It goes on to say the former is a common sentiment among libertarians left and right who argue, like Michael Huemer, that when the government taxes citizens, what this means is that the government demands money from each citizen under a threat of force. If you do not pay, armed agents hired by the government will take you away and lock you in a cage. The affirmative of the latter is a less well-known sentiment, but is rooted in Marxist exploitation theory. Richard Wolff explains in Democracy at Work, A Cure for Capitalism, how profit is the excess of the value added by workers' labor and taken by the employer over the value paid in wages to them. To pay a worker $10 per hour, an employer must receive more than $10 worth of extra output per hour to sell. Surplus is capitalist revenue net of direct input and labor costs to produce output. This argument is based in the labor theory of value, which is rejected by most right libertarians. Kevin Carson, in Studies in Mutualist Political Economy, rehabilitates it as the tendency of prices to fall to the cost of production in the absence of artificial restrictions like state-sanctioned monopolies. But even if one rejects this, the logic of the LTV actually comes very close to the Lockean principle of ownership acquisition via mixing one's labor. Corey Massimino explains, for 19th century anarchists, the labor theory of value, or cost limit of price, was the natural extension of the individual's absolute sovereignty over themselves. Labor was seen as the source for all wealth, and the laborer naturally owns the fruits of their labor as an extension of their self-ownership. Tucker's theory of value was intimately related to his ethical views based on each individual having sole dominion over their body and their justly acquired property, which required labor mixing. By this logic, profit could be considered theft from the same libertarian principles that outline taxation as such, and this has already more or less been done by proto-libertarians like Dyer Lum, who decries taxation, profits, and rent as superimposed burdens on labor. Okay, so I'm going to stop there because I think that gives you a good idea of what this article is about. So now I'm going to get into the replies because people had some interesting things to say. One man said, I can't deal with someone who says profit is theft. Don't even know where to begin. And someone else said, exactly. And then, another person said, if you think that your employer making a profit from your labor is theft, then go start your own business. Then you can keep all of the fruits of your labor. You can also see everything else that is involved in starting a business, like all of the upfront risk, capital investment, and a lot more planning and decision making than is usually required from an employment position. You might not even see a paycheck in the beginning at all. You might actually lose money as a result of the endeavor. Someone else said, yeah, there's definitely a difference between absolutely exploitative employment and fairly compensated employment. Maybe the writer of this article lumped everything into the former category. Non-entrepreneurs talking. Someone else said, it's almost like some people don't know what capital is. Derek replies, yeah, I don't think it's the strongest argument, but again, I don't need to agree with everything someone says to appreciate the overall sentiment. Being able to do that is powerful for individual growth. Yeah, but you'll see that he does pretty much agree with the article later on. Someone said, or no, this is Derek, sorry. It's a problem with some. They don't distinguish between exploitative labor and not. But again, the argument of many on the left, including some left libertarians, is that profit is wrong or stolen value from the worker. I don't really see it. I do know that Konkin believed in a truly free society there would be less hierarchical workplaces because people would voluntarily choose cooperatives and similar startups. So, then someone who I'm going to call V because this person is like the main person arguing with his points said, what was your takeaway as the overall sentiment? Derek replies, of the whole piece. V says, yes. Derek says, first, are folks familiar with agorism, left market anarchism, left libertarianism? Maybe I haven't done a good enough job sharing about this topic in recent years. I've sort of left behind my constant writing and talking about these topics. This is a technique that he used on me when I had an argument with him in the chat. He was basically like, well, you clearly don't know what you're talking about. Read my articles, blah, blah, blah. So anyways, it's kind of annoying. And then he responded, I think this sums it up. What I propose then is that principled opposition to both taxation and profit can be combined into a cooperative agorism. What I'm talking about is certainly not mutually exclusive from this, but rather, more specifically, the practice of agorism using cooperative principles. Let's say Emma is selling X, where X is a nonviolent, illegal, or off-the-books product or service. Instead of selling X as an individual, Emma could pool her resources with other interested parties and establish an informal cooperative outside of the taxable wage labor economy. Emma could start an off-the-grid, farm-to-consumer herbalist commune, or get all the kids in the neighborhood into an equal shares babysitting business, or team up with IT nerd friends to undersell big tech corporations in their city with a DIY computer co-op. In all these scenarios, profits will be pooled and distributed democratically, resources and knowledge will be shared with other informal and sometimes formal co-ops, and concern for the local community would be a high priority. So then V responds, so what's the compensation setup? Is everyone working for free initially? Do the kids in the babysitting business earn the same share as Emma? What is Emma doing? Presumably she's coming in with the idea and managing a bunch of 14-year-olds. Is she also doing the sales, marketing, and the books? Who is doing customer service if something goes wrong? Derek responds, are you familiar with co-ops? V says, only vaguely. That's why I'm asking these questions about the babysitting business. Derek links another article. I think the idea would be start with these principles. I'm not going to, well, maybe I will actually. Fuck it. Just click on this link real quick. This is from a website called NIPCO, and it's titled 7 Principles That Guide Cooperatives. Voluntary and open membership, democratic member control, member economic participation, autonomy and independence, education, training, and information, cooperation among cooperatives, concern for community. Okay, then it goes into the description of those terms, but I'm not going to read them. Vanessa says, those seem like worthwhile ideals, but it didn't clarify how a teenage babysitting co-op would be structured. And yeah, this is kind of my issue with all of this stuff, is it's all about ideals, and it's not about the practicalities. Someone else responded, one of my major criticisms of socialist ideas is that some work provides more value than other work. Also, some work is more difficult, riskier, more unpleasant, takes longer to pay out, etc. than other work, i.e. starting a business versus taking work as an employee. As such, some work, like management or starting a business, needs higher compensation for other work, like entry-level employment, or else there isn't ample incentive to be sustainable. So I'm wondering if the co-op model accounts for this. What is the incentive for the founders or management to use a co-op model instead of a profit model? I think that's a very interesting point. Pause. Derek responds, "Ha, well, I don't think it's going to be spelled out. It's about how you structure a business or operation, meaning people share responsibilities, decisions are not made by one single person, etc." I definitely see that for sure. The idea is that some approach it differently and believe that all positions should be paid the same, or people should rotate between all jobs, things like that. I have no experience actually starting a co op, but I know of many businesses that have taken the approach. V responds, "Interesting. I'd be interested to hear the experiences of the businesses that have done it." Someone else responded, "But I don't see those compensation models being able to compete with capitalist enterprises. Where is the incentive for the CEO to stay on with an organization that pays him the same as the dishwasher? If he/she has that kind of skill, that's a major opportunity cost to be underpaid in that way. Alternatively, why shouldn't the CEO just settle into a low-stress position like dishwasher and go home at the end of the day without having to worry about anything? When I had just graduated, I had a friend take employment in a cafe because it was paying the same as the entry-level professional jobs, which were very high stress." Derek responds, "Chelsea Green Publishing says they are employee-owned, not specifically a co-op, though. In 2012, the company began transferring the majority of its ownership to its employees through an employee stock ownership plan. 3 years later, 78% of Chelsea Green's stock was owned by its employees, with the Baldwins retaining the remaining 22%. The idea is not to have a CEO. The idea is to have voluntary horizontal businesses." And then he linked a few more things. Someone responded, "But even if there's no CEO, once they get big enough, there have got to be management level positions." Derek responds, "Not necessarily, that's an assumption. And what if the problem with companies is that they get so big?" So I kind of touched on this in my video on emergent governance systems, because this is exactly the argument for sociocracy and other models, except for the fact that they end up actually having hierarchies anyways, except that they are unspoken. And there's like all this linguistic garbage that kind of conceals that. So Vanessa responds, "I also don't see a model where everyone switches between positions as being practical or having a competitive advantage over capitalist models. I've worked the job where I had to be the jack of all trades and the job where I got to be a specialist. I was far more effective when I got to be the specialist." And someone else responded, "All right, so how would you run a co-op the size of Ocean Spray without any management positions?" Derek responds, "That could be true. It might not work the best in all industries. There are indeed arguments people have made against co-ops and such. I'm not sure I get the focus on management. Do you understand the concept of employee-owned, horizontal, etc.? I encourage you to check out more of these links to learn more." Vanessa responds, "How are you going to scale without management?" Someone else responded, "I've been looking at all of those links, but they don't discuss or make any arguments for the compensation models that you've suggested." Derek responds, "As I said, I'm not an expert, and I don't think there is one single way to do this. Different companies probably would pursue different methods. The point is experimentation with more equitable and functional forms of workplaces. For me, entrepreneurship is the way to go. Also, the idea that you need one person to be in management, etc., is just outdated." See, if you don't understand this stuff, it's because you're just really outdated. You just don't get like what all the new kids are doing. And then he said, "Have you done any other searching? Just saying you keep coming back with questions, but you clearly are not doing research and reading in the 2 minutes between your responses." Like, that's just kind of a dick response, to be honest. And then he just linked a few more articles. Vanessa responds, "You're arguing that it's possible to run a successful co-op with these egalitarian compensation models or lack of management positions. And I'm pointing out the flaws that I see in those models. I'm not looking to go off and do a research project. I'm just asking you to explain and defend your own argument," which clearly he can't do, right? It's like, oh, look into it more. If you don't get it, you just you're just not with it. You just don't understand. You need to do more research. I mean, this is like a very typical argument that I hear from people that have bad arguments, to be honest. Derek said, no, that wasn't really what I was arguing. I actually didn't know I was arguing. I was sharing an essay that I found intriguing. But yeah, I expect people to do some research rather than just ask a million questions. And again, it's like, what if you come to a conclusion that can't be answered by these questions, or that conflicts with what these articles are saying, right? And another person said, yeah, I've been looking at these articles and I don't really see what is going on here. Like, it's not really answering these questions. And then he said, try rereading this for response. V responds, look, I was not looking to upset you or start something contentious. I just wanted to have a conversation and discuss what you thought of the ideas, since I think they're flawed and it sounds like you think they're viable. I didn't think a research project was a prerequisite for a discussion. That's fair, but if you reread your replies about management, I think it's also fair that you're making an argument that management isn't necessary, which he absolutely is, which is consistent with what the article was saying, unlike what he said originally about, well, I can disagree and still read things. I mean, like, come on, yeah, everyone can. That's not a special thing that you can do, Derek. He responds, I don't think management is necessary, and I don't think that's controversial. It definitely is controversial. And if you're saying it's not controversial, it's because you don't want to have a conversation about it. Perhaps we are just coming from different backgrounds. I am an anarchist. I already said I am not an expert. Yeah, clearly. I was mainly sharing it in regards to bringing cooperatives into the agorist theory. Okay, and then it ceases to be exactly what, a lot of these people are thinking, which is more along the lines of anarcho-capitalism. But many people do, indeed, run businesses as co-ops. If you are looking for answers on that, or even holes, which I am open to, then probably better places to start than a dude who doesn't run a co-op. Yeah, but like, you're a very influential person and you're posting your ideas everywhere, and so like, it's kind of important that you know what you're talking about. I don't know. That's just, I feel like when you're a public figure, like, you have a lot more responsibility and you need to be able to respond to these types of questions. So, yeah. Perhaps it isn't controversial from an anarchist standpoint that management is necessary, but definitely from a general standpoint it is, and I feel like if you want to bring people into your fold, like, you have to have a response to things like that. And yeah, I definitely agree. I think that there are definitely problems with this model. I feel like a co-op can be used for certain things, but not everything. And so trying to apply that as a business structure, basically that should be able to work for any type of business structure based on certain principles that include things like, equal shareholding of the company no matter what your position is, or what else? Like, sort of just this idea that if you're a wage laborer, you're inherently being exploited. I definitely don't agree with that. I think that that's a very complicated issue, and certainly at one point in this country, wages were pretty fucking good, and they're not anymore. But I don't view this as the solution to that. So, but I am not an anarchist, so yeah. And so someone named John responded, I'm interested in the co-op model for one of my businesses. It can work, and I've heard of awesomely successful and big cooperative businesses. You can have a business that is organized horizontally and used as sociocracy or holacracy method of decision-making and project management. And Derek responded, sociocracy, consensus +1, etc. Lots of options besides the old boss-employer relationship. Yeah, and sociocracy and holacracy are very deceptive, which I detailed. And also, the organization Sociocracy for All is intimately tied to the UN. I covered that in my Emerging Governance Systems videos. So, that's pretty much the end of this chat discussion. I just wanted to share an example of how I think people like Derek Rose are sort of twisting things and being misleading and also not able to even like back up the points they're making. And also it really confuses me how he's able to respond to all of these messages like so quickly. I mean, how much time do you have outside of your daily life and your job to respond to people's messages on apps? You know what I mean? In addition to all of this research, he's supposedly doing and like touring and giving speeches and just doing all of this stuff. It's like amazing to me that um, he's doing all of this in a way that is not aimed to, I guess, create his own profit, not to be tongue in cheek with the fact that, the article states that profit is just the same as taxation in terms of theft. I don't think either one is theft, by the way, but yeah, like profit is stealing from the worker. Taxation is also stealing from the worker or the citizen, if you will. So, yeah. But certainly the statement taxation is theft makes a lot more sense in a very direct way than profit being theft. I don't think there's really any way you could argue that profit is theft. I am kind of interested to read more of this article. I'm just not sure how interesting it is for my viewers, but so it presents a counter-argument. Most right libertarians would argue, however, that profit is earned from the voluntary exchange between employer and employee based on the former's ownership of the means of production. But one can take a libertarian position to as extreme a point as Carl Hess did and suggest that much of what people call private property is actually stolen. Ooh, I'm glad I continued reading this. Much is of dubious title. All of it is deeply intertwined with an immoral, coercive state system which has condoned, built upon, and profited from slavery, has expanded through and exploited a brutal and aggressive imperial and colonial foreign policy, and continues to hold the people in a roughly serf-master relationship to political economic power concentrations. Okay, so that is not a libertarian position as far as I'm concerned. That sounds very communitarian. And also more in line with traditional anarchist principles, which basically do not recognize private property. I had an exchange with someone in Telegram about this who did not seem to understand that. And again, linked me literally an article written by a 16-year-old about what anarcho-capitalism is. And I'm like, well, I'm actually familiar with what anarcho-capitalism is. And actually, like, I've studied a lot of anarchist theory and stuff like that. And so I'm just no longer satisfied with it because I'm an adult now. I'm sorry. I don't want to be offensive, really, because that's not the point of this channel. The point of this channel is to, like, wake up people that are very well-meaning and try to, I guess, like, provide more input and perspective on things and try to steer people away from certain traps, because I've just noticed that this whole like culling of the herd and telling people, oh, you don't need to resist, just walk away from it, just walk away, you don't have to resist the powers that be, just like, try to untether yourselves from them as much as possible, which is not necessarily a bad idea in and of itself, but as far as directly fighting these people goes, I don't think it is very effective, to be quite frank. And yeah, it says it right here, like, it's any means of ownership is based on, brutal and aggressive imperial and colonial foreign policy and all this other crap, so. It goes on, one can also look at the primitive accumulation, subsidies, regulatory capture, and monopoly privileges that have favored capitalists over the entire course of U.S. and global history. As such, Carson proposes that, from the dialectical libertarian perspective outlined by Chris Matthew Sciabara, the corporate economy is so closely bound up with the power of the state that it makes more sense to think of the corporate ruling class as a component of the state. It definitely does. And the problem with that is, we don't have a separation between these corporations and the states. The problem with lobbying and private-public partnerships, that's the actual problem here. It does not call for the dissolution of the state and the abolition of private property. Okay, let me be very clear. This shit that's going on, that's wrong in our country and in our world, does not will not be solved by the dissolution of government and private property. Trust me, it will not be solved by that. So this would ultimately mean that, like Logan Glitterbaum explains, what the fuck is that last name? Because all large-scale private ownership of the means of production is the result of theft, coercion, enclosure, corporate subsidies, state licensing regimes, zoning laws, government bailouts, tax breaks, intellectual property laws, and other political favors. It is therefore illegitimate, and capitalists have less of a claim to its ownership than the worker. Glitterbaum allows, while yes, if the original owner can be found, the property should revert back to their control, and the decisions about what to do with it should rest with the original legitimate owner. As Rothbard and many others have pointed out, finding the original or legitimate owner can sometimes prove to be difficult or even impossible. It was in such a case that Rothbard claimed that the next best option was to turn such property over to those who have put the most labor into it recently, the workers. By this analysis, workers generally have a greater claim over the means of production than capitalists, thereby making the extraction of surplus value a form of theft. If one accepts this argument, what then is next in terms of praxis? The immediate solution to the taxation problem, according to many libertarians, is agorism. Agorism, as a refresher, is a left libertarian anarchist strategy developed by Samuel Edward Konkin III that, as Derek Brose explains, seeks to create a society free of coercion and force by using black and gray markets in the underground or illegal economy to siphon power away from the state. Konkin termed this strategy counter-economics, which he considered to be all peaceful economic activity that takes place outside the purview and control of the state. This includes competing currencies, community garden schemes, tax resistance, and operating a business without licenses. Agorism also extends to the creation of alternative education programs, free schools or skill shares, and independent media ventures that counter the establishment narratives. It is important to note, however, that not all agorism must take place in the gray or black market. Only horizontal agorism must meet this criteria. Brose describes, alternatively, a vertical agorism that includes things like participating in and creating community exchange networks, urban farming, backyard gardening, farmers markets, supporting alternatives to the police, and supporting peer-to-peer decentralized technologies. These practices can be considered agorist in the sense that they are aimed at building self and community reliance rather than dependence on external forces, but they are not explicitly counter-economic because they do not involve black and gray markets. This is not only about taxes as it runs deeper toward avoiding as much state intervention as possible, but the movement toward a black, gray, and informal markets is generally avoidant of taxation in one way or another. This covers taxation, but what about profit? Interestingly, while taxation is theft appears to be a more well-known slogan than profit is theft, the solution to the latter is perhaps more well-known: cooperatives. Based on the assertion that the primary problem of capitalism is the exploitation of surplus, Wolff advances that worker-owned businesses should replace the current capitalist organization of production inside offices, factories, stores, and other workplaces in modern societies. In short, exploitation, the production of a surplus appropriated and distributed by those. In such an enterprise, profit as it exists in capitalist businesses does not appear even when the profit motive is utilized, because the surplus value is controlled democratically as opposed to being appropriated by capitalists. And worker-owned cooperatives, as with all cooperatives, function under 7 central principles. And I named those principles earlier. So this article continues going on. I don't feel I need to read this because people tend to tap out after a certain amount of time on these videos anyways, and I'm approaching 30 minutes, but yeah, I just wanted to share that with you, and thanks to my friend who alerted me to this message thread. I also think it's important to pay attention to how people respond to things. Um, in these types of messages, I feel like it says a lot about who they are, and I do feel like although Derek presented a lot of articles, the way he responded to things, I wasn't personally really satisfied with either. So, all right, I'll let you go on that one. Thanks, everyone.